There was once a time where video games were still trying to find ways to emulate what it feels like to watch a TV show or movie, an industry chasing another to increasing success. By the time games had proven they can be shot like movies, acted in like movies, or have the production quality of the best that industry has to offer, there was a shift. Game narratives warranted adaptations into the same industry that didn't take them seriously, and lately it's been working. However, the jump to total parody feels impossible. Every story requires exposition. It's in its implementation that can truly determine the way a writer thinks of their audiences or the source material. The Last of Us has since Part 1 in 2013 had a masterful weaving of just enough exposition to get you involved until they serve its resolutions up. You experience immense trauma through the lens of Joel losing Sarah, an intro roll of credits that gives you hints of the world's progression, shortly followed by Joel being confronted with a reminder of his past. It sets up just enough of a narrative to where you had ideas of its potential progression while also understanding that this was not a predictable tale in how it arrives at its biggest moments. The Last of Us Part 1 doesn't ask a lot of you. You can enjoy it full-heartedly without having to be overanalyzing every single moment. There is immense depth to be found should you want to experience it to its fullest, but you can also be wowed without having to look inward. The Last of Us Part 2 asks the opposite of you, and in many ways is the antithesis of Part 1. Neil stated at the reveal of the game 4 years prior to launch it would divide its audience.
First game was really like the core of it. The theme was about the love between these two characters. This story is the counter of that. The story is about hate.
The largest difference as the story arrived at its second part is that The Last of Us Part 2 asks a lot of its audience. You are constantly asked over and over to look inward and decide what or who you deem right or wrong. And they're never easy topics. This alone was always going to cause more division than even Joel's fate. When you force someone to look in a mirror, it can be uncomfortable. When people don't like what they find, you will mostly be met with conflict. In the case of The Last of Us Part 2, that conflict is directed at its creators. As a result, its audience goes to war with each other. When something like this happens to a story so beloved it becomes pop culture, things get ugly. Due to the nature of The Last of Us Part 1 being less dependent on its gameplay to land as a story, the first season of its HBO adaptation was mostly brilliant. The problem becomes The Last of Us Part 2 requires far more restructuring in order to even remotely land at the same heights as the game. There are very few video game narratives that are quality dependent on being a game more than Part 2. The most important aspect of this adaptation to get right are the parts of it that are not gameplay dependent. Part 2's use of player psychology is what is most brilliant about it. You are forced to partake in things that make you feel deeply conflicted, and as soon as that conflict starts to internally resolve for you, they shock you back to the ground and make you reassess again and again. You are not a mere spectator to this that can lay back and watch it unfold. It doesn't reach its conclusion until you take every step yourself. It's in the player controlling the character where attachment and emotion are most notably tested. This is Season 2's greatest challenge, and it's where so far it's been its most confusing. The way Abby is introduced in Part 2 has immense subtlety. A new face you're controlling within the first 30 minutes of a sequel so sought after. Not Ellie, not Joel, Abby. An unknown woman at the time whose only exposition is that she's clearly having an internal battle of some kind, and upon looking over Jackson speaks of a man she's been in pursuit of capturing. It's not until Joel by chance saves her from the Horde where both the player and Abby's jaws get to drop simultaneously upon Tommy's introduction of the brothers to her. It's only 6 minutes from this event to when the assault on Joel begins. You have 6 minutes to process what an unfortunate situation Joel has landed himself in before he's taken from you. In episode 1 of Season 2, Abby gives a full explanation of her entire goal. It was worth at this point giving the benefit of the doubt to the writing of episode 2 and beyond of what might be different that causes the need for a change of this caliber. Craig Mazin has handled the narrative of The Last of Us with immense understanding to this point. However, episode 2 Through the Valley didn't seem to provide any reason for its biggest changes. The entire Abby-Joel dynamic plays out almost identically in order of events outside of a swap of patrol groups. But much like Part 1 is the antithesis of 2, the HBO rendition of this scene is the antithesis of its counterpart. Abby can act different and all is well. It's important to bring your own flavor to an adaptation within the realm of the character's origins. However, the exposition of Abby followed by her killing of Joel doesn't sting the same way when you're sat down and explained to the setup in detail. It assumes you won't put it together on your own, which feels like a growing trend in Season 2. What makes Joel's fate so potent and unbelievable in The Last of Us Part 2 is that not only do you have 6 minutes to process what's likely about to take place, but the brutality of it all happening in under 2 hours of what is a promised 20-hour plus narrative. You are taken to the bottom floor of a lodge that upon entry just feels wrong. Everything about this room, from its lighting to framing to positioning of the characters, feels evil. There was never a more obvious moment that the world of The Last of Us was about to show just how unforgiving it is. The fresh viewers of The Last of Us Season 2 that have no history with the game have handled the death of Joel very differently than its game audience did. It was treated as a monumental episode of TV, which it was. However, the attachment wasn't quite built with the characters the same way. It's here where games tend to excel and do things that TV can't. A longer, uninterrupted runtime. People who experienced The Last of Us in 2013 spent 7 years sitting with the events of that game, continuing to discuss its characters, their motivations, where it could go next, and reliving it over and over again. Or even some choosing to continue existing in that world by way of the multiplayer. 7 years is a long time to wait. Attachment to characters tends to be far more intense. These waits inadvertently create more pressure on what comes next. You run the scenario through your head a million times of what happens after the lie. By the time Part 2 launched, fans had reached a boiling over point. You could argue Joel is one of few characters in pop culture history who has cultivated admiration at this level. TV viewers who were none the wiser to the game were given close to 9 hours of total content in Season 1, followed by a mere 2-year wait. Show viewers loved Joel, but it was a different kind of love. One that can still hurt you when you watch him die so quickly in Season 2, but one that was tame enough to not carry with you in anger into following episodes. This season begs the question of, if you're willing to change so much of what didn't need elaboration, will the things that can only carry weight with your hands on the controller be left to suffer? Game 2 being split into 2 seasons immediately came with concern. How do you convince a TV audience to attempt to develop empathy for Abby's side of the story when they'll be waiting 2 years to see what happens post seeing Joel be beaten to death? It's a complete pause of emotional processing. The amount of exposition and reveals the show's rendition offers may have fixed that issue inadvertently. Many viewers who are completely ignorant to the game are already seeing Abby's side. The same level of attachment, while still strong, wasn't built with this Joel and Ellie, and as such, Abby's already being empathized with. Games come with deeper attachment. What's most beautiful about The Last of Us Season 2 so far is that while still being amazing television to those new to it, it's showcasing just how incredible games are as a storytelling medium. It shows some stories cannot contain their potency when brought to TV. You can't force the realization that you'll be playing as Abby for the next 15 hours on TV. You can't discover on your own that the Seraphites are clocking your every move with whistles as fluent as words. It apparently needs to be explained to you on TV. And there is definitively no way to emulate the feeling of being forced to pursue Ellie yourself in the theater as Abby and beat her down by your own button presses. The Last of Us Part 2 is a video game, and as mildly frustrating as it can be to watch it not work as well as Season 1, this is a greater win for the medium. Naughty Dog, Neil Druckmann, and everyone involved in the crafting of Part 2 should, under the lens of the show's second season, be praised for how much more elevated the original telling is. The realization one has to come to is that the current telling of The Last of Us isn't necessarily for the longtime fan. It's for people who don't play games or even lack interest. And that's okay, even if it admittedly stings a little. Everyone should get to experience the story on their own volition, but as it stands right now, this telling is one of far less depth. It feels like a reaction to the poorer side of The Last of Us Part 2's initial reception as a game. The Last of Us Part 2 respected the player's intelligence and ability to think for themselves so much that in ways it blew back on Naughty Dog, and it seems the show wants to give you a far more consumable experience. We just won't know for a couple more years if it was a mistake. But if Craig Mazin can write something as good as this, then I'll continue to give the benefit of the doubt that the show can find the complexities of the game. It just hasn't happened yet.